Can you be a good person without believing in God? Atheists often claim that their atheism is not a set of beliefs, rather, atheism is a mode of thinking, namely scientific and analytic thinking.
The analytic mind realizes that there is no scientific evidence for God, therefore belief in God is irrational. Atheists say that such reasoning about God has nothing to do with morality. In reality, however, this analytic thinking promoted by atheism has everything to do with morality. To understand this, we need to define two contrasting modes of thought.
Analytic thinking versus intuitive thinking. Our default mode of cognition is intuitive. Intuitive thinking is automatic, and it's driven by deep psychological mechanisms we are born with. When a person feels that he should help his ill mother, that's an intuitive mode of thinking. When a sailor lost at sea calls to God to save him, that's also intuitive thinking, grounded in the universal intuition that God exists. Analytic thinking, in contrast, is not automatic or easy. Analytic thinking requires concentration. It's used to solve complex problems and analyze situations. Analytic thinking is used not only in science and academia, but it's also the mode of thought used for criticism and argumentation. Numerous studies show that when you disrupt people's concentration with loud noises, time constraints, or other distractions, they fall back to intuitive thinking. This is why there are no atheists in a foxhole. When distracted by the horrors of war and the imminence of death, analytic thinking shuts off, and the intuitive mind takes over. Normally, our thinking is a blend of both intuitive and analytic modes, but sometimes the two modes can conflict. In those conflicts, analytic thought can be used to gut intuitions.
This is what we see with atheism. The atheist tells us that analytic thought is the only way to understand the world and the only way to arrive at truths, whereas intuitions are nothing but bias.
But recent cognitive science and psychological studies have shown that overdeveloping the analytic parts of our cognitive faculties can greatly diminish not only our religious intuitions, but also moral intuitions. World-renowned psychologists and researchers like Jonathan Haidt and Joseph Heinrich explain that high analytical thought is correlated with less of what's called deontological morality. Morality generally falls under two categories: consequentialist versus deontological. Consequentialist morality focuses on consequences and calculating how to maximize pleasure and reduce harm for the most number of people. This makes consequentialist morality very analytic in nature. Deontological morality, however, is much more intuitive and relies on gut feelings and innate ethical tendencies such as caring for family, feelings of disgust or reverence, respect for authority, and loyalty to one's tribe.
To better understand the contrast between consequentialist and deontological morality, consider this scenario.
A man goes to the supermarket once a week and buys a dead chicken. But before cooking the chicken, he has sexual intercourse with it. Then he thoroughly cooks it and eats it. Is there anything morally wrong with his actions? Purely on the basis of consequentialist morality, there would be nothing wrong with this since there's no harm, and in fact the man increases his overall pleasure, so it might even be an ethically good action. But deontological intuitions tell us that such an act is perverse, it's disrespectful, it violates decency, and therefore is highly immoral. The surprising thing is that when people are asked about this chicken scenario, those who have a Western secular education are far more likely to find nothing objectionable to it. What academics now recognize is that when the analytic side of cognition is inflated due to education, upbringing, and environment, deontological intuitions become muted, if not entirely canceled out.
This overemphasis on analytic thinking is exactly what atheist psychology is all about. And if you asked, you might be surprised that many atheists would find nothing wrong with copulating with a dead chicken and then eating it. It's not a coincidence that many popular atheists have openly stated that they have no moral objections to
incest, bestiality, necrophilia, and other so-called victimless crimes that most people of the world would consider unspeakably evil. Even Richard Dawkins recently claimed that there's nothing morally problematic about eating human flesh, so long as the meat has been cultivated using human clones in a lab. What we must realize is that healthy human relations are fundamentally deontological. For example, a woman could greatly increase her physical pleasure if she cheated on her husband without him ever finding out. But she doesn't do that because that would be unfaithful, and infidelity is morally wrong regardless of any positive overall consequences. A son might have a lot to gain by frequently lying to his father, but he doesn't do that because lying, especially when directed to one's parents, is morally wrong, regardless of the upside. A mother could greatly enjoy life if she gave up her baby to a foster family, but she doesn't do that because her strong maternal intuitions tell her not to abandon her child, regardless of the massive increase in freedom she could enjoy. All relationships require a healthy sense of deontological intuition, but this is precisely what a hyperactive analytic psychology destroys. The analytic mind favors consequentialism, and consequentialism says the only thing that matters is maximizing pleasure and personal happiness, basically pumping dopamine into the brain. But sometimes maximizing that dopamine requires lying, cheating, cutting off family, betraying your community, violating sanctity, engaging in the taboo. So when atheists promote analytic thought as the end-all be-all of human cognition, they're not only burying natural human intuitions about God, they're also sabotaging all organic human relationships. Psychologist Jonathan Haidt, who is a committed atheist himself, as well as others, have published numerous studies on how atheists are less charitable, less generous to family, less loyal to community, more willing to justify lying and cheating for material gain, more willing to engage in infidelity, and much more. Atheists might claim that atheism is solely about the non-existence of God, but that's not true. Atheism is an integrated psychology that is strongly correlated with an ultra-consequentialist, ends justify the means, Machiavellian morality that is hostile to all human relationships. It's no accident that atheists have been at the helm of the past century's most expansive and brutal social engineering projects aimed at dismantling and radically reshaping the traditional family, all in the name of the so-called greater good. Secularism institutionalizes this analytic mode of thought, indoctrinating children and adults to overcome their natural intuitions and become cold, calculating machines. It's precisely the atheistic mindset, drunken with an unhinged analytic fervor, that has been fueling the modernist project of hyper-consumerism and atomization that's destroying the human species by transforming us into a race of dopamine-addicted automatons. This is the pill that destroys our nature and kills the soul. But we can become human once again.